Yes, moving on though. So college football this weekend. You said that week 2 doesn't have a great slate, but I think for all intents and purposes, week 1 was actually pretty damn good, don't you think?
Yeah, some excellent matchups. We had a couple more upsets. Some hit a little too close to home, right? But good week, good slate of football, good games. I think we learned a lot about a few programs. Georgia looked really stinking good. We talked about there not being maybe a clear cut number one. They may have made a case for that on Saturday.
It's hard to deny. And Georgia, I understand for the first half they didn't look like maybe we thought that they would look. I think you jokingly said that Georgia was already up 21 in crunch time last week. And I don't think that the final score indicated necessarily how lopsided the game was or how close it was even in the first half. Because look, Clemson kind of held tough for a while. I think that their defense is pretty good. I don't know if Cade Klubnik is the guy that's going to get them there. But what I do know is that great teams excel in the second half, and Georgia certainly did that. They left no doubt. And I agree with you. They're the consensus number one, but that's not really the story. The story this weekend, in my opinion, was the ACC. And, it's my home conference where the Hokies play, but Clemson didn't look very good. And honestly, not a lot of the teams that I think people thought were ascending teams in the ACC look good, except for Miami.
Yeah, unfortunately, your Hokies took one on the chin against
Ugh.
Vanderbilt, which was rough. And then, you mentioned Clemson, Florida State taking 2 in a row to Boston College. And then the U, though, you're right, man. They looked really, really good. Granted, by all accounts, Florida's supposed to be down this year, and, Billy Napier's probably on his way out there. But they did what they were supposed to do. And that's all you can ask of a team that is on the rise. And so we'll see where they go from here. But I would say the ACC runs through Miami at this point.
I would say so. And I think Cam Ward is already maybe an early Heisman candidate. I mean, he had a great season last year. I believe it was at Wazoo. And he goes to the ACC and he looked really good in his debut. But you said it, though, is that teams like Miami, who are constantly heaped praise and given expectations every year, they always fail in games like this. And they didn't do that. They not only won the game, they won it handily, to the point that Miami players were trying to recruit Florida players on the sideline.
That was hilarious, man. And I saw when I watched that video of them over there, because they had the high school kids down there, like in the end zone in a certain area, like staying on the field as they're walking off. They're like, come to the U, come to Miami, everything else. And how could you not see that and be like, yeah, I don't want to be a part of what just happened here. We're not even the best football. Florida isn't even the best football program in their state right now, let alone competing for national championships, which is something that when you go play, if you're a top recruit going to play somewhere in the SEC, you're going to compete for national championships. So it felt a lot like the old school U a little bit, seeing that. What do you think?
If there isn't something that recruits the best, isn't not winning. And I understand today's NIL world and all that stuff, but I think there are a lot of players, especially ones that have a very high sense of competitiveness. They don't only want to get the bag, but they want to win. And I think that's why a lot of these players transfer so often, because it's not just about getting a bag and sitting on a bench. They want to go somewhere where they can be valuable, where they can win, where they can get that stardom. And Cam Ward did just that and proved it. And so Miami is looking at the state of Florida, as you say, that Florida State now looks like they're on a downturn, and how quick that downturn came from last season to now. Doesn't mean their season's over, but starting 0-2 makes it very difficult to have any sense of competitiveness when it comes to, are they going to make the playoff? And then you have Florida who's down. And so the U has a chance now to take a stranglehold on the state of Florida. And if they do so, that means that they're going to be powerful for quite a while, because they have a great head coach who I think may be figuring some things out. And now they have a recruiting pipeline, and that's huge for them.
Absolutely, it is. And there's tons of talent in Southern Florida.
Yeah.
I mean, in the state of Florida as a whole, but Southern Florida is overflowing with high school football talent. And if you can recruit those kids and get them to stay home, which is what Howard Schnellenberger was able to do, and Jimmy Johnson continued it, and so on, you can build an empire there. And, again, I know there's been speculation of how much the university is on board with the football program and how supportive are they. It's funny because there were conversations like that existed in Notre Dame, that how supportive is the administration really of doing the things necessary to help put a competitive football team on the field, but getting the right people in the right places and winning can start to change a lot of that, and you can get people to come around. So it'll be interesting to see kind of what transpires this year and then moving forward for Miami.
So if we can move on to my Hokies for a second, and if you'll if you'll indulge me for a minute. So
Indeed.
we do some reaction videos now on TikTok, and I think it's a fun addition to some of the things that we do. I mean, we like to analyze here and we like our long form stuff, but over the weekend I did something that I've not done in quite a long time, and probably since Justin Fuente's first year, where I got hopeful. I actually was excited for this team in a way that I pushed my normal realism aside. And as I got into this game, despite feeling a little bit of hesitancy about the game coming up and all that, I still felt like, all right, this is the year. This is the time where the Hokies are going to rise back again. And what I saw in the first half was awful. It was a completely ill prepared football team, a completely ill prepared coaching staff. Nobody looked like they knew what to do. Nobody looked like they knew how to adjust. And it's just, you cannot come out looking like that. And in the second half, they did come back, but there were too many mistakes. And the mistake that cost them the game essentially was having two number zeros on the field, giving them 5 yards. And that field goal was all the difference. It doesn't matter where it came in the game. At the end of the day, they were tied at the end of regulation. And the thing that sucks is this doesn't mean that their season is over, but what it does mean is that they are not the team that everybody thought that they were, at least not now. Maybe they grow into that, but it certainly gives me pause. It gives me pause because if Brent Pry were the kind of coach that I thought that he was, the team would never look like that. And I just was disappointed in how they looked. And I don't know if you agree, but first game of the season on the road against an SEC opponent that has been a perennial bottom feeder for the last 10 years, you cannot come out and look that unprepared.
No, you're right. And there's certainly plenty to be concerned about on the Virginia Tech front. Obviously, they have yet to arrive, right? I think we all really were very optimistic about what we were going to see. We thought that they were going to, and they still could contend in the ACC. They've got some mistakes to fix, as you mentioned, but let's be sure to not discredit Vanderbilt too much because
No.
they played well.
Yes.
And we talked about it. Clark Lee's coaching for his job. You're going to get his absolute best. And even as a bottom feeder, it's still an SEC job. And the places that you can springboard to from the bottom of the SEC are much more significant and impressive than a lot of other places. So let's not take away from them and their performance. And my goodness, man, Diego Pavia, the quarterback for Vandy,
Yep.
what a gritty dude, man. Like
Mm-hmm.
that guy balled.
Oh, God. But like, can we not get a spy on the quarterback? I mean, how many times is he going to roll out and do that? And that's what was so frustrating is the game plan that Vanderbilt executed well is the game plan that the Hokies should have executed well with a bigger, taller, faster, stronger guy at quarterback. And that's what was so frustrating is it's like they didn't know what to do. A couple of times I almost texted you 1st and 10, hand off to Audric Estime because that's what it felt like. It's like 1st and 10, let's just hand it off every time when it's just not working. And you're absolutely right. I should give credit to Vanderbilt because their fans have supported them. They have been through it all. And you know what? Their game plan was better executed than the Hokies, fair and square. They made more plays than the Hokies did. And
It did feel like Virginia Tech was outcoached.
Oh,
Which is
100%.
disappointing when you really are optimistic about a guy like Brent Pry. It's incredibly disappointing to feel like you're outcoached. And athletically, you got to believe that Virginia Tech probably has better players, at least based on recruiting rankings and things. Maybe, I don't know. That might be a bit of a stretch. I don't know.
I don't
But
know.
I agree though, man. Yeah, there were times where it looked like they were a little lost. Like they thought that they were going to show up and Vanderbilt was just going to roll over because they were supposed to lose, and that is definitely not what happened.
No. God, it was so frustrating. But the Virginia Tech is a microcosm of what the ACC kind of looked like this weekend, to where The only teams that really looked good were the middle to bottom teams who played inferior opponents, except for Boston College, except for Miami. I mean, Clemson
Yeah,
played Georgia, obviously.
Wake Forest and Virginia players at this week. I
I
mean,
don't even know.
it's
But
just like
my
the worst game ever.
this is just the way the conference is right now, and they're getting made fun of for being mid. And after this weekend, I can't necessarily disagree. But let's talk about somebody else who may have a mid football team, and that's Brian Kelly at LSU. And maybe that's hyperbole, but the funny part or the ironic part is you and I both said that this was going to be a matchup where can these defenses hold it together? How have these two guys recruited their defense? They both lost Heisman Trophy winning quarterbacks. And I don't know if it was the defenses playing better, the quarterbacks just kind of getting into the rhythm. But I would say that defensively, I think they both look pretty good. But Brian Kelly's team, I don't want to say he got out coached, but it certainly looked like his team was not as prepared as you would think that they would be. And I have to give all the credit to Lincoln Riley. They made those plays at the end and won that football game. And they may actually have a real chance this year.
So that was a very Brian Kelly-esque performance. I've seen plenty of them. Those are games that, there was a lot of chatter amongst the Notre Dame faithful. Those are games that he lost while at Notre Dame a lot. Those types of games you would consider maybe like a statement game. And to come up short in that fashion, very on par, on brand. I think that
No bias at all, right?
much like Clark Lee, I'm grateful for what Brian Kelly did at Notre Dame. He resurrected them from sort of a really bad, dark place and won a lot of football games. He's the all-time winningest coach at Notre Dame. I mean, so
Oh, really?
you say he's the
Oh,
all-time winningest coach at Notre Dame. So you say what you want about the guy, but he won a lot of football games. He just didn't win the right ones, I
yeah, I
guess.
was going to say he didn't win the big one.
Yeah. So in regards to USC, much like we just talked about Clark Lee at Vanderbilt, Lincoln Riley's a guy that I think is coaching with a sense of urgency, if
Yes.
you will. And I don't know that you could say that Brian Kelly's on the hot seat this early. I mean, he's at the same mark as Lincoln Riley, but the SEC is also a different beast. I mean, they'll present a check. The boosters will present a check at halftime that's going to pay for your buyout to have you fired in the SEC. So
Talking to you,
anything's
Jimbo.
possible. Anything's possible. But I thought that game was going to be a track meet, and it wasn't at
No.
all. And I mean, so credit to both of them for getting their defenses to improve, apparently, unless unless the offenses have regressed. But definitely some improved defense. Kudos to, I thought that's a game that you're not used to seeing a USC team win. I think it took a little toughness to kind of to hang in there and win that game. And that's not something that USC has been known for in the recent past, is having that toughness about them. So credit to them for that. And we'll see. I mean, I hope USC's at the end of Notre Dame's schedule this year. So I hope they run the table, because I want that strength of schedule opportunity to be there at the end as a Notre Dame fan. So I want them to win them all. So we'll see how it goes.
One thing I think you can say is that Lincoln Riley does know quarterbacks, and Miller Moss, I believe, he looked impressive to me. But I don't want to get crazy here, Brad. But did USC play? They played Big Ten football this weekend. It kind of felt like it.
Yeah, well, I feel like when you play an SEC opponent, the SEC is known for being physical. I think you have to adapt your style of play somewhat. I mean, you can't play. I mean, we saw it all the time with like these high-powered offenses in the Big 12. We talked. They never played offense in the Big 12, right? These Oklahoma teams, Oklahoma State. I mean, it's just high flying, 45-42 football games, and they'd run up against Alabama, and it's like you can't play that style of football. So I think you have to adapt your game plan a little bit. Maybe try to shorten the game against some of these more physical teams. But who knows, man? It's really tough to say. I think judging a team off one game, and this goes across the board with every team we're going to talk about, judging a team off one game is kind of unfair. I mean, but that's all we have to go off of at this point in time. I think here in a couple of weeks we'll have a better idea of how for real or not for real some of these people are. How bad are these losses? Maybe Vanderbilt freaking wins 10 games this year. Who knows? Maybe that was not a bad loss for Virginia Tech. Maybe LSU wins the SEC. I don't think so. But the best kind of the part we haven't mentioned yet about that game is Brian Kelly's reaction in the post-game press conference. Like It's so weird because in a way it almost feels forced. Like I'm angry. You know what I mean? And but at the same time, it's like if you're gonna pretend that you're pissed, like that's not the route to go. Because not only did you kind of look like an idiot, but you also just probably lost the locker room if you haven't already. That's kind of the way that I took it, and I like that. It's funny. He says it's the first time he's been angry. Well, at his team at LSU, because I remember a couple years ago Notre Dame
Okay.
lost to Florida State, and at the end of the game, he was being interviewed on the field and said, "Well, I'm a big fan of execution, and perhaps our entire team should be executed tonight." So
He said it
I don't know.
nicely.
He did. He was very polite.
I the, Brian Kelly, it's funny because when we were watching this game, my wife and I were watching the game, and I said something flippantly about like, oh yeah, Brian Kelly, typical. And she's like, what do you mean? And I'm like, great football coach, but great asshole too. Like,
Oh yeah.
pretty. She's like, well, why? And I'm like, just Google Brian Kelly and you'll
Well, he's
probably
from the
find.
Northeast.
Well, there you go. But I was like, probably just like, there's just so many things you could say. And at the end of the game, she watched as some of the LSU players were sticking around on the bench. She's like, why do you think the players are sticking around on the bench? I'm like, well, what hurry they're going to be to get yelled at in the locker room? And obviously it was true. But Brian Kelly, to me, never came off genuine in any way. And so that reaction seemed like something that he thought about on the way to the press conference. Like, I'm going to do this. And I think the reason being is because he knows he can lose games like that at Notre Dame, and that's not a shot at Notre Dame. But I think he can lose those games because Notre Dame has the ability, with not being in a conference, to still get into the playoffs, still be relevant because of the brand. LSU is a great football team, but I would say that they're not as much of a brand as Notre Dame is. And so in the SEC, it's all about winning. And you have to win in order to get into the playoff. He can't just be Notre Dame and get into the playoff by the virtue of being Notre Dame. He's got to be feeling the pressure, no?
Oh, I would think so. I mean, Notre Dame has uh, a passionate fan base that cares a lot. That's unrealistic at times, like a lot of other programs. The difference between Notre Dame and the SEC, for example, is in the SEC, like they will punch their grandma in the face to win a football game.
Yes.
They do not care at all. And they say it just means more, and it really does. There's no denying that. It's a great slogan because it's accurate. And I'm not here trying to stroke the SEC by any means.
Just
That's
do it,
just the
man.
truth, man. It's
Just do
just the
it.
freaking truth. Um, I mean, one of the reputations that Notre Dame has is whenever someone comes to play at Notre Dame, an opponent, all the fans talk about how welcoming and nice the Notre Dame fans are. That's not you know what I mean? Like that's
Nope.
not like what you want to hear. It is not a hostile environment at all. I mean, now they get into the game and they're passionate and stuff like that, but I mean, it is not what we saw at Kyle Field on Saturday night when Notre
Oh,
Dame played
no.
Texas A&M. It is
Gig
not
him.
what you're going to see in Death Valley and Baton Rouge or anywhere else across the SEC for that matter. So, granted, I mean, most Notre Dame fans can read as opposed to maybe some SEC fans, but I
Ooh.
think that the level of intensity it's different, man. It's different.
Well, let's talk about Notre Dame. Notre Dame looked impressive, I think, in a game that you said was going to be tough. And I think that it was tough, but Notre Dame certainly defensively showed that they could step up to the plate in an environment that it was ready. Like Kyle Field was ready to go. And it was one of the coolest things I've seen in quite a while. Actually, the fans were ready to go. And this is the kind of game. This would you say that this is a game Brian Kelly would have traditionally lost?
Yes, 100%.
And guess what? Marcus Freeman, by the way, if you have not checked out the hype video of him getting hyped up before the game, you should do so because it'll get you hyped up for any day at work. But Notre Dame performed and they looked like they earned that top 5 ranking. Would you say that's fair?
Yeah, I think it's fair. I think that as a Notre Dame fan, and we knew that there was going to be a certain narrative out there nationally. So now, since Notre Dame won, now it's well, Texas A&M must not be very good. I mean, that's just the way it goes when you're a program like Notre Dame, and until they beat somebody like in Alabama or Georgia or Ohio State, that's just where it's going to be. That's fine. hopefully Notre Dame gets that opportunity at some point in time. But um, I also think it's funny though how the narrative, even towards Texas A&M and M and their players, the narrative is, okay, they must not be very good. The quarterback must not be very good. The offensive coordinator, Colin Klein, must not be very good. Like, can we give a little credit to the fact that they played against one of the best defenses in the country?
Yeah.
Like, you don't have to like Notre Dame to admit that that's one of the best defenses in the country. And I mean, they were a top 10 defense last year. They returned a couple All-Americans. Like, they're an elite defense. You can't deny that. And I understand that people in the SEC don't like to acknowledge that about a Notre Dame, but that's just the cold hard truth. And sure, like, did they make some mistakes on offense that were probably like uh, self-imposed errors that had nothing to do with Notre Dame? Sure. Like the one interception, the quarterback essentially overthrew the receiver right into the arms of the safety. So, like, in that case, like, you can't really say, well, Notre Dame made a play, but they had a guy in place to make a play when the opportunity presented itself. But yeah, bad throw. Uh, but what caused that bad throw? Was there a pass rush? We could go on all day, but about the game itself, I thought it went just the way I thought it would, man. A defensive struggle. I thought both offenses would struggle early to get it going. It would just kind of come down to like who could sort of figure it out first. A lot of penalties, man. Like that's the thing. If you looked at the stat sheet and took the score off the top and was like Notre Dame was like 2 of 17 on third down or something like that. I think they had like 11 penalties for like almost 100 yards or something. I mean, there was a lot of things that you'd be like, there's no way they won this game. And that to me gives me optimism. It's like, man, they made these errors and still won by 10 on the road against a good opponent. And Texas A&M is going to get better. Mike Elko is going to get that going down there. And I don't think that this game should be an indictment on him or that program, because I think they're going to be just fine. If anything, it put unfair, unrealistic expectations on him in this game, and the coaching staff. Again, that's just the way these people are wired, and that's fine. There's people that were ready to, I was telling my dad, I go, I guarantee you there's people on the message board when Texas A&M went down and kicked the field goal. They're probably ready to fire Al Golden, you know what I mean? Because they gave up a field goal on the opening drive. I mean, it's just, fans are crazy. Notre Dame's under Al Golden, they've always had a bend, don't break defense. And that's what it is, man. And it works, and it gets the job done. They suck it up and get a stop when they need to. And Riley Leonard was, he was not very good for 3 quarters. It seemed like it took him a while to settle in. And but once he did, he put the team on his back and got the W.
I mean, is it fair to say that it takes players some time, especially when they transferred? I mean, he's played at Duke, and now he's playing at Notre Dame, and his first game is against his old head coach. Like, there's a lot of different things. Coming off an injury. Wasn't he injured last year too?
Yeah, he got injured like mid-season. Notre Dame hurt him in that game. He got injured in that game, and then like he tried to play against Florida State. They were actually winning that game, and then he got injured, like re-aggravated the injury. But I mean, and even him, dude's like a 5th-year senior. He's never played in an environment like that.
No,
you know what I'm saying? And you talked about the Marcus Freeman hype video, and he referenced it in a press conference where he said, it was intentional. He's like, he turns around because the offensive line was leading the team out, and he sees 2 of the freshmen standing there, and he's like, those parental instincts sort of kick in where you're like, you want to sort of like let them know, you want to take some of that pressure off of them and let them know that, like, hey, like, I'm like, this is exactly what we thought it was going to be. Like, I'm here with you. This is exactly what we thought. This is exactly what we wanted. And let them know that, like, we're in this together, sort of thing. And so that was really cool to see, because you don't really see that out of Marcus Freeman a whole bunch. And he's a pretty like mild-mannered, stoic guy most of the time when they show him, and that's kind of been oddly enough, a complaint from some Notre Dame fans. And we saw a little different version of him on Saturday night.
It was cool to see, but you talked about not making judgments after one game. I just want to remind everybody, or tell everybody, that in the first half of the Penn State-West Virginia game, somebody sitting on this feed, I won't say who, texted me that, who sucks, Drew Allar. And then I believe he threw like 4 touchdowns after that. As the Nittany Lions went on to not only cover, but look really impressive in Morgantown. Would you be willing to say that that was you?
That was definitely me, man. He didn't look good in the first half.
And you went on to say, how come it is that the Big Ten can't recruit quarterbacks? Like, you went all the way. It seems
like they struggle to recruit elite quarterbacks. I still think that's a fair statement, that the Big Ten struggles to recruit elite quarterbacks. I mean, and I guess what's your definition of an elite quarterback? Are we talking just purely elite at the college level? So you could say Justin Fields is elite at the college level. Obviously, it hasn't panned out for him at the next level.
No.
But I mean, how many elite quarterbacks have transferred out of the Big Ten to go be elite elsewhere? Joe Burrow, I guess
Yeah.
Quinn Ewers, we'll
Quinn
see.
Ewers. But did either of those guys really make any semblance of an impact at Ohio State? No.
They were shipped off campus before they
Correct.
had an opportunity.
Yeah. So there you go. So if you
I
want
mean,
to
maybe that just talks about their judgment. Their quarterback evaluation may not be great.
Yep.
But
and Joey Burr is doing just fine.
Yeah, no, he is. But Penn State, holy smokes. I think the difference in that game, I'm assuming we're going to talk about that game briefly.
Yes.
The difference in that game, I think, was the moment, right? Penn State has, although they have not won any of them, they've played in a lot of big games here in the last couple of years against Ohio State and Michigan. And so the moment was not too big for them. I don't think they panicked. This is the biggest game played by West Virginia in probably a decade, maybe.
Yeah,
honestly.
probably.
Probably the most meaningful, impactful game they've played in a decade. And so a lot of hype, not having been in that environment, in that moment, with that sort of pressure and stress against a good opponent, I think that matters. And I think what you saw to Penn State is similar to what you saw to Notre Dame, a team that has gone through their growing pains a little bit. They've ironed out some of these like kinks and the reputation of choking in big games. Went on the road to Morgantown. Now, if it would have been a 7 p.m. start, maybe it would have. Maybe things would have looked a little different. But they took care of business, man. And I don't think that it's an indictment on West Virginia. I think Penn State's actually. I'm gonna eat crow for what I said last week because I was not drinking the Kool-Aid. I think Penn State is for real.
All right, that's fair enough. You're a man enough to admit when you were wrong. So we're going to go over a few of the week 2 matchups because we do want to spend more time in the NFL with a really intriguing slate of week 1 games in the NFL. So I think the biggest marquee game this weekend that you should pencil in on your calendars is Texas traveling to the Big House to face Michigan. Texas is a 7.5-point favorite on the road. Texas took care of business for real against Colorado State, looked really impressive. I think Sark has a team that could repeat as making it to the playoff, if not a national title contender. Michigan, on the other hand, I think they're rebuilding somewhat. And I know we both talked about the expectations being high, but this is a game where I feel like Texas, it's theirs to lose.
I feel like Texas is definitely the better team on paper. They looked better through 1 week. I saw someone make this comparison. I was going to send you the video on TikTok. They referred to Michigan as Iowa. I said Michigan is Iowa. Elite defense, and then they run the football. But then I heard it not too long before we came on. I watched another video. Brady Quinn was talking about this, how when he was at Notre Dame, they played at BYU week 1 and we're playing Michigan week 2. And so the last 2 weeks of camp leading up to week 1, they were doing Michigan prep. They were prepping for Michigan. And so then they show up to go play BYU. And BYU plays a completely different defensive front, completely different coverages, everything else. But like the coaching staff believes that, like we'll be talented enough to get by, but we'll be ready for Michigan. Well, they lost to BYU, but they did beat Michigan the next week because they were extremely prepared, but they bit the bullet to BYU because of it. And he's, basically the reference was that maybe Michigan was doing something like that against Western Kentucky, just trying to not show anything, they're playing 2 quarterbacks. So it's like, now you got to prepare for 2 different guys. A very vanilla game plan. The defense is going to be good. I mean, so maybe there's a little strategy there, but what I would say is that's maybe getting a little too cute as a first-year head coach against a good opponent. We'll see. I mean, Sherrone Moore is either going to be, I think this game is almost going to make or break him. I mean, they're either going to win and everybody's going to be like, holy crap, like this guy's for real. This, Michigan is still Michigan, or they're just going to get the doors blown off of them. I don't feel like there's really any in between.
Yeah, Texas just feels so good. And like you said, if They are doing that. Michigan, I mean, that's a little too cute for a first-year head coach, especially coming up on your second game ever as the head coach there.
with a
But
lot of new players.
yes, a lot of new players. And to move on to some other games, a couple of SEC teams are traveling on the road. Tennessee traveling to NC State, they're 8-point favorites. And this one actually intrigues me. Arkansas at Oklahoma State. Now, Oklahoma State, Mike Gundy, he is a guy who's been there for a really long time. Like, people forget that he's a man. He's over 50 now. So he has been there
Wow.
quite a bit. And the thing about Mike Gundy is he's kind of he's won a lot, but not really won anything of substance. I think he's very similar to some of these other teams you're talking about, Penn State's, the Brian Kellys and stuff. And Oklahoma State's always that team that starts like 8-0. We feel good about them, and then they lose 3 out of their last 4, and they're out of the playoff. But this year, Mike Gundy has a real chance to make the playoff with the expanded playoff now. And Arkansas is a weird SEC team who they're not good, right? They're not terrible, but this could be one of those games that sneaks up on the Pokes, don't you think?
Yeah, maybe so. It's a good opponent. Sort of similar circumstances to what Virginia Tech experienced, right? Um, I good football program. You can't take anything away from Arkansas. I think that what's interesting about Oklahoma State and Mike Gundy is he seems to win games they're not supposed to win,
Yeah.
but then lose to inferior opponents. And I don't know if you could qualify Arkansas necessarily as an inferior opponent. I know on paper they are, but again, not to I'm just over here just loving on the SEC apparently, but it's it'll be very interesting, I suppose. But I think I don't know. I mean, I'm going to stick with the Pokes. I think that you know this is a game they win, and he does feel a little almost like Kirk Ferency, huh? Like
Yeah.
just very consistent. I think, but I don't know. Do you think that he doesn't get enough credit for how good of a coach he is because of like some of the shtick?
It's possible, but I also think that he isn't allowed to stay as long at a program that is of higher they're like Oklahoma State's not a blue blood. Obviously, they have a lot of wins. They've done a lot of winning. They've had some great players. I mean, Barry Sanders obviously played there. But my point is like you can get away with being 8-9 wins and not really going to a playoff, winning a bowl game. And I think you could do that and have your stick because at Oklahoma State, that's great. That's a lot of sustained success. And to
Yeah.
be fair, sustained success is hard to come by and it's hard to keep. And so he's been able to do that. He just hasn't won, as you said about Brian Kelly, the games that matter.
Yeah, good enough to keep his job, not good enough to get hired away for a big time job. You never hear his name float around
Never.
with any of these major jobs when they open up.
And maybe that's by design. But then again, as you said, the shtick, I mean, he did take a shot at Connor Stallions this past weekend, which I thought was
I
pretty
thought it
damn
was
good.
funny. That was great.
I know, I thought it was good too. But I mentioned Tennessee and NC State. The reason I bring that up is NC State really struggled this week in their opener. And it might be what you said. They might have been thinking about Tennessee already, trying to employ some strategy, not show a lot, because that's a tough opponent for them. But SEC and ACC, I just feel like the SEC has the advantage there. But the game I know that everybody's going to be watching for a lot of reasons is Colorado traveling to Nebraska, renewing an old rivalry. And the reason why we're bringing this up is because, Coach, we got our very first voicemail to the show. Are you ready?
I am ready. This is really exciting.
Justice Wiggins, Jackson, Mississippi, and I don't think Colorado's in any trouble at all. I feel like, well, North Dakota State is a top FCS school, and I feel like FCS schools don't get enough respect. So, yeah, that's all I gotta say.
So first time, long time, obviously, for Justice from Jackson, Mississippi. We want to give a special shout out. That was our first ever voicemail to the box. And I'll be honest with you, it's something that we talked about when it comes to Colorado, that maybe we didn't give North Dakota State enough credit, but I still believe that Colorado needs to look better against opponents like this because they're not going to surprise anybody. And if they're barely going to get out alive at home against a team that has a target on Colorado's back, what are they going to do when they have to go to some place like Lincoln, who's going to be ready for them?
Justice, thank you for the voicemail. You said two things that were correct: that North Dakota State is a good football program, and that there are some FCS teams that are very good that don't get enough respect. That Colorado is going to be okay. is incorrect. I hate saying that, man, because we
Yeah.
have freaking pumped up Coach Prime in Colorado here on the show, like for a year and a couple games now, and they got 2 elite players, 3 elite players, maybe. Shedeur Sanders, Travis Hunter, and the Jimmy Horn kid, and that's it. Um, Shedeur was able to stay upright for the most part. The offensive lines maybe improved a little bit. The defense struggled. I um I don't feel good about it. And I think that Nebraska is on the rise. I think Nebraska is going to have a really, really good season. We'll see what they get out of Dylan Raiola, a true freshman quarterback. But, from a couple of the quotes I've seen floated out there, the kid seems extremely confident. And that's definitely, one of the ingredients you need to be a successful Division I quarterback. And so and this is in Lincoln, I believe, right?
Oh yeah, it's in Lincoln, and I
Um,
feel like Lincoln is one of those Blacksburgs. It's just waiting to be relevant again.
just been waiting longer than
A
Blacksburg's
lot
been waiting.
longer. Yeah, a lot longer since like 2001. I think that's the last time they went
Yeah.
to a national championship game. But Colorado, Nebraska in the 90s, it really meant something. And I agree with you that I think Colorado could be in trouble this year. And not because I want them to be. And I want to be very clear about that because we got a couple of comments that said whether they win or lose, you'll still be a hater. And I very promptly was like, real analysis is not hate, it's reality. Like, we're hoping that they do well. And yes, Coach Prime is going to do a great job in making sure that these kids do well at life overall. And at the end of the day, that's a really important aspect. But he was hired to be the football coach at Colorado, and he's hired to win. And if they don't win, they're not going to sell all the tickets. They're not going to sell all the merch. Like, you can only have that shtick for so long. And if they come into this game and they get the doors blown off them, how do they respond in game 3? And that's kind of what I want to see here. But I'm going to tell you what, Nebraska is not going to take them lying down. Lincoln is going to be so loud and ready for this game because they come in with a target on their back. Hard stop.
They do. I would be thrilled to see Colorado win this football game
Me too.
because man, college football. Remember how exciting the first few weeks were last year when Colorado was like ripping off wins, and we were like, "Holy shit, man!" Like I would, if they win this game, like we are on the cusp of some excitement like that, and so I hope that it happens because it would make this awesome season that we're getting into here even better. But I don't know. I don't know. And what Jeremy said here, what happens when this boy goes pro? Like I've wondered that. Like honestly, in my opinion, dude, I think he's gone. I think I would not be shocked if this is his swan song at Colorado. And I know that's he's not going to say that publicly, but I think that despite all of the things that I like about Coach Prime, I think even he would tell you that he is very selfish, probably, and worried about his own self interest and his family's. And I think that somebody was in here, I think last week, that said him and his kid will both be in Dallas next year, which would
Yes.
be the most Jerry Jones thing ever to do.
But do you think
Um,
that's legitimate, though? Do you think that if Shadur goes to a team that is like the Cowboys, where they have a head coach that they're not in love with, or is at the end of their tenure? Like, I would have said that maybe about Tennessee if Mike Vrabel was still there, but obviously he's not now. But the Cowboys are in that weird position where, remember, they're all in, and Mike McCarthy's their guy. Except when they once again lose in the playoffs, they have to fire him. And you're right, Jerry would love to have Deion Sanders as his head coach, and if he can quarterback or coach his kid, all the better for Deion.
I hate it, man. I hate being like so negative about it because
We're haters.
I like Coach Prime. I like what he's done. Well documented here, but holy crap! Like
We're haters.
if
Just
he ends
embrace
up
it, man.
the head coach of the Cowboys, like you guys, I mean, you guys think that Mike McCarthy is not qualified to be an NFL head coach, and dude, maybe my opinion of what is required to be a head coach in the NFL is completely wrong, but my goodness, like, I mean, hey, if he can take on like he's trying to do at Colorado, like that CEO role, I guess, and then just hire really talented coaches around him, maybe that's the ticket.
to be fair, I think you can do that in the NFL more so than in college, because in college you have to be tapped into recruiting and you really have to talk to these kids. Whereas in the NFL, it's a business. And I don't think Coach Prime can get through to pros who, a lot of them now, these younger generations, they don't care
You don't
what
think he
did.
can? I see.
I don't know.
I think maybe he could.
Do you really? Because I think the pro today is just worried about getting the bag. And I know a lot of them want to win, but a lot of these younger people coming into the NFL, they don't give a crap what he did and who he was in the NFL.
Okay. If you are a wide receiver from wherever, I don't care. Elite 5-star wide receiver, you get drafted by the Cowboys. Coach Prime is the head coach. Are you more apt to take advice from someone that's been there, done that, that's a Hall of Famer, or Mike McCarthy? I mean, I'm just saying, if we're talking about this sort of CEO role, overseer, who do you think is more relatable to these young men, on a as far as maybe knowing where they come from, what they're about, what motivates them, so on and so forth. And I'm not saying like Mike McCarthy has won a lot of football games, right? I'm not taking away from him. What a Super Bowl, right? I believe.
Yes, one
Yeah.
of
So,
them.
and so I don't want to take away from him too much. I know that Cowboys fans are pretty down on him, but like, I do think that Coach Prime would be able to maybe tap into something there that people like Mike McCarthy aren't able to. But then, like, not to use the chubby white guy stereotype, because Andy Reid has been very successful. You know what I mean? So it's maybe there's different ways to skin a cat. We'll see.
There are. Actually, I think this is a good segue to the NFL. But before we get there, a couple other games I want to mention to have on your radar. Boise State traveling to Oregon. The reason I mentioned that, Oregon a heavy favorite at home. They look kind of iffy against Idaho. I think Dylan Gabriel, he looked awesome. But with as much as as well as he looked, they did not look good on the scoreboard. So that's one to watch, because
Right.
obviously Dan Lanning and the boys have national championship aspirations, and they got to win these games and look good. App State traveling to Clemson. I mean, this is a game Clemson should win, but it's all about how do they look? How do they respond? And I think that's all that you really are looking for there. Marshall at Virginia Tech. Same thing. How do the Hokies respond? They're a heavy favorite at home. If they look bad 2 games in a row, I'm going to say that Brent Pry isn't ready for this moment.
Dude, Virginia Tech is living the Notre Dame season from 2 years ago. Notre Dame went on the
hate
road,
you.
lost a close game to Ohio State, then came home and got beat by Marshall.
I hate you.
And you mentioned App State, giant killers, man, giant killers. The Mountaineers.
Are they still, though, or are they still getting praise for 2007?
Well, they're about to be getting praised for beating Dabo, in the other Death Valley.
Wow. Okay, that's a big prediction there. And last but not least, Northern Iowa traveling to Notre Dame. Thing you want to look out for here is Northern Illinois. I had it written down here on the sheet, but does Notre Dame have a hangover from such a big game? Because sometimes coming down from that kind of game can be a little bit tricky, but I think Marcus Freeman will have the boys ready to go. A weaker college football slate than this past week, but still a lot of things to talk about. And next week, we'll talk about